Good afternoon. As you know, I am Dr. Weiss, and I am going to be discussing Anton Chekhov and Lady with the Dog. I'm going to be presenting to you some background information on Chekhov, a little bit about his life, a little bit about his legacy, and to tell you a little bit about Russia in the 19th century so we can have some sort of context. The slides in this presentation are going to be very minimal. These would be things that in a different situation, if you were in my class and we were face to face, then I would just be sort of wandering around the room and talking about Anton Chekhov. So the focus on this is not necessarily on the visual, but more of just what I'm going to tell you. And when we get to discussing the short story, Lady with the Dog, the slides again are going to be very, very minimal. I'm going to tell you what edition that I'm working in. And we are going to sort of operate together, I hope, in this strange video format, as if you were sitting in my class and I'm telling you to turn to a certain page and read a passage and for us to think about what that passage might mean. Anton Chekhov is considered one of the greatest dramatists and short story writers, certainly one of the most important and most famous in the Russian literary tradition. I love Anton Chekhov. I don't know why, I don't know how, but I was introduced to Anton Chekhov, probably my pet dinosaur and I, when I was a teenager and read a collection of his short stories, and they spoke to me. And then I think that also speaks to again, the sort of overall argument about world literature. I didn't know anything about Anton Chekhov. I didn't know anything about Russia. I didn't know anything about Russia in the 19th century. But he wrote in a way that spoke to me, an American teenager. And so I think that is important. Anton Chekhov lived from 1860 to 1904, so just past the beginning of the 20th century. He is considered both a realist writer, and we've discussed realism, and in some ways an early modernist. He didn't really live very far into the modernist period. By some accounts, modernism didn't start until the next decade from when he had died, but these literary genres are not etched in stone. He was born in Taganrog, Russia, on the north side of the Sea of Azaz, a small sea just north of the Black Sea. The region of Crimea is located on the western shores of the Black Sea, with the southern city of Yalta. And this is going to be the sort of main geographic region of Lady with the Dog. So Yalta and Taganrog are, within the same sort of geographic space. Certainly not a 2-hour drive, quite a distance from one another. Yalta in the 19th century, as in the 20th century, as in the 21st century. Yalta, as a part of Crimea, is a disputed place, part of the Ukraine, and it's a place that people would go and vacation at. It was here in Yalta that Chekhov died, not very old at all, at the age of 44. He had a very complex relationship with his father, as often as we have explored. Children have complicated relationships with their parents. His father made his children work at the family grocery store until when Chekhov was a young boy, early teenager, I believe, that the grocery store went out of business and his father was pursued by creditors. His father and the family moved out of Taganrog and moved to Moscow, and the young Chekhov stayed behind. In fact, it was because of these circumstances, because of necessity, both for expression, as often writers write to express their feelings about things, and for economics. But he began writing short stories. He was able to sell some of his short stories. He was able to help his family financially. Later on, a little bit later on in life, Chekhov went to medical school on a scholarship. He became a doctor and also continued his writing. He was both a full-time doctor and a full-time writer. And Chekhov, as a doctor, was interested in people of the lower socioeconomic class, poor people, those that were impoverished, and it was perhaps his sensitivity explored through his writing that brought him closer to the people that he was helping. So in terms of Chekhov's legacy, again, of both late realist and perhaps by some accounts an early modernist writer, major contributions to short story, to short fiction and drama. And Lady with the Dog is considered one of his greatest short stories, and I highly, highly recommend, and you will not be disappointed, to pick up a collection of Chekhov's stories and read a collection. They are fantastic. So, what was it about Russia in the 19th century? What do we need to know? Well, of course, like any country, any region of the world, the 19th century being an incredibly important century in the history of most countries, the move from whatever one country might be existing in at whatever technological level one might be or economic level one might be existing in to one of modernization. There was a tremendous amount of social inequality and as a result a lot of social anxiety. There were a series of leaders that were both progressive in Russia in the middle to late 19th century and also very conservative. Those conservatives were not interested, let's say, in helping the lower class, but maintaining the status quo. And a wealthier class and maybe more progressive leaders were interested in elevating and freeing the serfs and broad educational opportunities and people's rights and things like that. The 19th century, in the later part of the 19th century for Russia, there was a period of rapid industrialization, which occurred much later than most other countries, particularly those in Europe. And major transformation often left certain groups of people behind, as well as that culture needed to have time to catch up. The leaders in Russia realized towards the later third of the 19th century that Russia was behind. They didn't have the necessary capital to catch up to the rest of the world, the rest of the industrial world, but they tried to do so. But they could not transform their technology fast enough without enough money. Population doubled in size from the mid-19th century to the end of the 19th century. Serfs, which were an agricultural laborer bound from centuries-old feudal system to work on a lord's estate, was a major element in Russian society. A serf was a kind of slave, and this was ended in 1861. And this, to put things in context, then was when the American Civil War started. But elites and oligarchs weren't behind social equality or wealth equality. Russia's population was substantially larger than those of more developed Western countries, but the vast majority of people lived in the countryside, lived rurally, in rural communities, and engaged in relatively basic kinds of agriculture. And when I say basic, mainly in terms of small-scale agricultural production with very modest technology. Agriculture remained in the hands of former serfs and former state peasants, who constituted about 4/5 of the rural population. In 1881, revolutionaries assassinated Alexander II. His son Alexander III initiated a period of political reaction, which intensified a counter-reform movement that had begun in 1866. And this was, again, a reaction against progressive governmental policies to create equality across socioeconomic boundaries. Writers, social critics, intellectuals were fearful as they critiqued Russian institutions, including the government. This is the context of Lady with the Dog. Now, we don't sort of see this necessarily, all of these dynamic interactions, but this is the context, and I think we're going to see a little bit of this, particularly when Gurov goes back to Moscow. So this is the sort of personal background of Anton Chekhov and the historical context of the that fills out the literary background of Chekhov and this text. So we're going to start talking about the text, but before we do so, I can't remember if I've asked, has anybody heard or read Anton Chekhov before? Brandon? John? Brandon? Yeah, you might have heard of Anton Chekhov. Brody, was that a hand? No? Yes? Not really? You're not sure. Kate or Evelyn, you guys ever hear of Anton Chekhov? You ever read Anton Chekhov? I was first introduced to Anton Chekhov a long time ago, and whenever I have an opportunity to teach an Anton Chekhov short story, I embrace that. So let's begin talking about the text, The Lady with the Dog. The first two paragraphs, and I've said this to you folks before about the opening sequence of a short story or any literary text. What is it about the introduction? What is it that the author wants us to know first? Well, let's read along together. I am on page 871, the beginning of the text. People were telling one another that a newcomer had been seen on the promenade, a lady with a dog. Dmitry Dmitrich Gurov had been a fortnight in Yalta and was accustomed to its ways, and he too had begun to take an interest in fresh arrivals. From his seat in Vernet's outdoor cafe, he caught sight of a young woman in a toque passing along the promenade. She was fair and not very tall. After her trotted a white Pomeranian. Later he encountered her in the municipal park and in the square several times a day. She was always alone, wearing the same toque, and the Pomeranian always trotted at her side. Nobody knew who she was, and people referred to her simply as, quote, the lady with the dog, unquote. So what is it that we are being told here? Well, we're told that people are telling one another. What does that mean? That means that there are, I think, a variety of different people that have gone to Yalta, this vacation area outside of the city, away from the city. We begin to start to see some distinctions very early on in this text between the urban environment of Moscow and whatever Yalta might be. This place on the coast that people go on vacation to, that it is not quite uncommon for people to go there alone. So Gurov, is he a part of this group of people? Not really. He's a part of the group of people insofar as he has an interest in newcomers, but we don't get the sense that Gurov has a group of people that he hangs out with. He's interested in this newcomer who walks around with the dog. What does the Pomeranian dog mean? What does the symbol represent? Well, I think the Pomeranian dog represents some sort of wealth, not the same sort of wealth as we're going to see, I think, that maybe Gurov comes from, the sorts of socioeconomic level. But she does have some. I mean, she's traveling by herself to a vacation area. The Pomeranian, small, special dog, representing that she has some sort of affluence, at least insofar as that she can travel. That she is identified identified as this person with the dog. This is absence of individuality in terms of identity. They don't know who she is. She's just this person. Makes for a nice painting, much like the painting that you see on this particular slide. That she's wearing a toque, and this is mentioned twice. This is a kind of beret. So this gives her a kind of exotic quality. So we have separation between this young woman and the people that she's interacting with or going to see in Yalta. So some distance that she is separated from. And there's a kind of distance between Yalta and the city. And this is going to be developed a little bit further along. The dog represents some semblance of wealth. the beret perhaps a symbol of an exotic kind of quality. We are told in the next sequence about his age. He's not 40, not yet 40. He has a 12-year-old daughter and two sons in high school, so we're given background information about Gurov. We are told here, and I am in the fourth paragraph on page 871, in the middle, on the right-hand side, about 3 lines down, actually. She was a tall woman with dark eyebrows, and this is the description of Gurov's wife. She was a tall woman with dark eyebrows, erect, dignified, imposing, and, as she said of herself, a thinker. She was a great reader, omitted the hard sign at the end of words in her letters, and called her husband Dmitri instead of Dmitri. And though he secretly considered her shallow, narrow-minded, and dowdy, he stood in awe of her and disliked being at home. What is this telling us? What is the text telling us about Gurov's wife, or at least Gurov's wife as seen through the eyes of Gurov? Well, we are told that there's something irritating about her, right? She does not call him by the name that he likes to be called. There's Dmitri instead of Dmitri. So something about the way she says his name he does not like. He considers her shallow, which is sort of an overall view he has of women, which, as the story continues, is later developed. He also says that he married her young, and perhaps he wasn't ready to marry. So they are married, they have a family, they have children, and this is the course, this is the background of Gurov's life. And as the story continues, we see why he goes to Yalta, this vacation area. We are told at the bottom of page 871 a little bit of Gurov's outsider status. He's, perhaps included in, from the very beginning sequence, that people were telling one another, but we don't get the sense that Gurov is included or has a group of people that he is friends with at Yalta, that perhaps Gurov is a kind of outsider, as well as this lady with the dog. And to evidence that, at the bottom of page 871, we are told, second line from the bottom, he was bored and ill at ease in the company of men. So this would evidence Gurov as being an outsider, perhaps in a space in Yalta where lots of people are outsiders. But instead of coming together and forming some sort of cohesive community, at least in terms of Gurov, he stands as an outsider. We are also told, and this is put in quotations, 3 lines from the bottom, his idea of a lower race. And this is his viewpoint on women, perhaps in general. On page 872, second paragraph, this is Gurov's worldview. Let me read. Repeated and bitter experience had taught him that every fresh intimacy, while at first introducing such pleasant variety into everyday life, and offering itself as a charming light adventure, inevitably developed among decent people, especially in Moscow, where they are so irresolute and slow to move, into a problem of excessive complication, leading to an intolerably irksome situation. But every time he encountered an attractive woman, he forgot all about this experience. The desire for life surged up in him, and everything suddenly seemed simple and amusing. So there are two kinds of worlds that are being described here. The world in Moscow, where even pleasant everyday things become very complicated because people in Moscow are irresolute and slow to move. And again, Gurov calls the sort of dynamics that take place in Moscow as one of excessive complication that become intolerably irksome. So that's his view of Moscow. So we have to understand what does Moscow represent? Keeping in mind the rapid industrialization of Russia in the 19th century, the dichotomy or polarization between the urban environment and the rural environment. I think we can begin to see these polarizations develop in this story and Godov reacting to them. Moscow becomes a symbol of modernity. Yalta then becomes something else, a place that people go to, particularly the lady with the dog and in Godov, a place that they go to escape. Now, to add on to this, it's just not a space that creates some sort of comfort by either going to Yalta or at least comfort in escaping modernity, escaping the dynamics of Moscow, the urban environment. And I think many of us are going to have a problem with this. Godov sleeps around. He meets women, he uses them, but we have to sort of reserve, I think, judgment on this because I think the women that come to Yalta may also, in some ways, use Godov for the same sorts of reasons that Godov finds comfort in being with other women. Godov commodifies women. They are sexual objects to them to be used. However, we will see if this comes to pass, if perhaps Godov is also commodified by women in his past that he has met and perhaps used him. He says here again in this paragraph, second paragraph, 872, 3 lines from the bottom, second paragraph, but every time he encountered an attractive woman, I just read this a moment ago, he forgot all about this experience. So it's not just about going to Yalta to escape Moscow. It's not just about escape, running from. It is also about running to. And whether or not there's any emotion or romance, that sort of thing, it is about physical connection. It may be cold sexual intimacy, cold in terms of the emotional connection, but it is a connection of body, two people being together. I think what Chekhov does, and well, a lot of scholars, a lot of people have said this. I mean, Chekhov captures these moments, and the beginning when Anna and Godov meet, this sort of awkward flirtation, uncertainty. I think this text captures really well. And let's just look at a little bit of this dialogue. Page 872, about 2/3 of the way down. The lady glanced at him. Anybody with me? The lady glanced at him and instantly lowered her eyes. He doesn't bite, she said and blushed. May I give him a bone, he asked, and on her nod of consent, added in friendly tones, have you been long in Yalta? About 5 days. And am I dragging out my second week here? Neither spoke for a few minutes. I mean, this really sort of this uncertain, ambiguous moment of almost intimacy here, but not quite intimacy. They're just getting to know one another, a little bit of awkwardness. The days pass quickly, and yet one is so bored here, she said, not looking at him. Well, why would one be so bored going to Yalta? This is the place that people go to, one, to escape their other lives, but to find excitement. Again, it's not just about the geographic space, it's about finding some connection. And I think a larger question that we have to ask, is there a kind of subversion or truncation of one's ability to connect to other people, to connect on an intimate level as a consequence of modernization? How has Moscow, as representing modernization, modernity, how has that changed people, done something to them in a way that prevents them from having a connection. And I think this is perhaps an area that we can explore with this text. It's the thing to say. It's boring here. People never complain of boredom in God-forsaken holes like Belyav or Zidra, but when they get here, it is, oh, the dullness, oh, the dust. You'd think they come from Granada, to say the least. So this is Gurov talking, and Anna responds. She laughed. Then they both went on eating in silence. I mean, we recognize this. This doesn't matter that this is the 19th century. This doesn't matter that this is Russia. This is a kind of date. And two people being in this place for similar reasons, but they don't know one another, and they're just working through that awkwardness. But after dinner, they left the restaurant together and embarked upon the light, jesting talk of people free and contented. Okay, so what does this mean? They don't even know each other. I wouldn't even categorize this first introduction as, it's hardly flirtatious. Now, Gurov, we know that he likes to sleep around. Here is a young woman. We're thinking Gurov probably wants to sleep with her. So I think that's fair to say. But there's something about it that she didn't move away from him either. She stays with him. She wasn't like, dude, enough. I got my dog here. I'm going to put my dog on you. I'm going back to my hotel. I'm going to watch The Joker. It just came out. It's $6 on Netflix. Leave me alone. She didn't say any of that. She walked with him. And I think here's the important part. They talked like people that were free and contented. So this I'm suggesting to you is the beginning of Gurov's transformation, the very beginning of it, but also Anna's transformation as well. They hardly know each other. They're in the space, but they can talk freely and be content, as opposed to their lives of where they came from with their families. Gurov begins to tell Anna about his life. Why is this important? Could this be a strategy just to get Anna to the hotel so he could sleep with her? Okay, I think you could make an argument for that. But I'd also suggest to us that as a part of the human condition, as a part of human nature, we like to tell our stories. And given the opportunity, if someone were to say to you, hey, tell me about you. You'd be like, I don't have time. I got text messages to answer, and I got to run here, and I got to work, and I got to... No. Forget all that. Tell me about you. And everybody, I think, maybe not everybody, most people, given the time, would write that novel. So Gurov, the text is telling us about Gurov's story. And they are exchanging stories. But let me back up just for a second. On the bottom of page 872, the top of page 873, there are, I think, some almost fairy tale moments in this text. Again, the context of Yalta, the romance, images here of nature. At the bottom of page 872, the water was a warm, anybody with me? The water was a warm, tender purple. The moonlight lay on its surface in a golden strip. They said how close it was after the hot day. Why are these, and I would argue that these sort of moments of nature, we can call them maybe moments of romance, why are they in this text? Why are they so important? Well, do they help create the polarity or the difference between Yalta and Moscow? I think so. I think that's part of it. But what I also think is that these moments, these beautiful moments of landscape and nature, will stand in opposition to the reality of the relationship that develops between Anna and Gurov. So they begin to we begin to learn a little bit about each of them. So at the top of page 873, a couple lines down, Gurov told her he was from Moscow, that he was really a philologist, but worked in a bank. That he had at one time trained himself to sing in a private opera company, but had given up the idea. That he owned 2 houses in Moscow, and blah blah blah. We see a series of dots, right? What does this mean? What is the difference? What is the distance between an opera singer training himself to sing in an opera company and being in a bank? That's quite a distance. And I think that this would speak to Gorov's dreams. What is it that he dreamed when he was young? I wanted to do this. I wanted to be an opera singer. Is that something doable? Is that something that's sustainable? Is that something that you can make a living at? And I think the answer to that is no. Maybe being an opera singer, being an artist, being a writer. There's a certain kind of impracticality. And instead, in order to support himself, he became a banker. What I also think is interesting here is this kind of biographical or autobiographical intrusion or footnote we can add of Anton Chekhov's sort of dual life, both as a writer and as a medical doctor. We learn about Anna, that she had grown up in Petersburg and got married, and she's quite young. And it says here midway through that large paragraph on the top of page 873, and that perhaps her husband, who also needed a rest, would join her. She was quite unable to explain whether her husband was a member of the province council or on the board of the Zemstvo, and was greatly amused at herself for this. Further, Gurov learned that her name was Anna Sergeyevna. Her husband also needed a rest, but we get the sense, just from the fact that Anna is here by herself, that there is a kind of alienation, and I think that this is going to develop between Anna and her husband. And why do you think that we are told Anna's name, Anna Sergeyevna, at the end of learning about, certainly the end of this paragraph, but after we learn a little bit about her life? Why do you think that might be the case? Well, we are first told, these are my thoughts on this, we are first told that she is identified as the lady with the dog. Nobody knows who she is. She's rumored. People have their eyes on her. She's identified by her beret. She's identified by her Pomeranian dog. A name is something very specific. You are so-and-so. You are Dr. Weiss. You are Anna Sergeyevna. So this is a story about you, Anna. But the fact that her name comes after her life story, I would suggest to us that it is a little bit easier for us to see ourselves in Anna's position. Let me continue reading on page 873, second paragraph. Back in his own room, he thought about her and felt sure he would meet her the next day. It was inevitable. As he went to bed, he reminded himself that only a very short time ago she had been a schoolgirl like his own daughter. Okay. What do you think is going on here? We are assuming that Gurov is attracted to Anna. This is going to be played out because they're going to continue on with a romantic relationship and also a sexual relationship. So he has interest in her in that way. He goes to women because of an absence of connection, and perhaps women go to him as well because of an absence of connection in their life. But what do you make of this association between Anna and his daughter? because of Anna's youth. Does it mean that Gurov wants to sleep with his daughter? I don't think so. I don't think that this is a story about, repressed incest or anything like that. Rather, and it's difficult to sort of separate the emotional desire and connection from the sexual desire. I get that. I understand that part. But what I think is that this is about Gurov's, this particular moment is an expression of Gurov's absence of connection with his daughter. So he sees Anna, he's talking to her, he's beginning to develop a connection to her in some way. He has a desire for emotional connection in a way perhaps that he does not have with his own daughter. Again, another bit of evidence that that suggests that Gurov is not only separated from himself, his own dreams, from the urban environment and modernity, but also from his family. So on page 873 still, I want to bring our attention to the third paragraph of section 2. So it's 2 paragraphs from the bottom. Owing to the roughness of the sea, the steamer arrived late after the sun had gone down, and it had to maneuver for some time before it could get alongside the pier. Anna Sergeyevna scanned the steamer and passengers through her lorgnette, as if looking for someone she knew, and when she turned to Gurov, her eyes were glistening. What is this suggesting? Well, the roughness of the sea could be symbolic of the sort of difficulty, complexity of their relationship as it continues to develop. That Anna is looking for somebody on the passenger ship, real or imagined, an expression of desire for somebody to maybe save her in some way, that connection that is absent here. And she turns to Gurov, and she is on the verge of crying, or perhaps has already started to cry. Looking out at that steamer, the person is not there. It's an absence of connection. She is then forced to turn to Gurov. He's next in line. He's the next best thing. And that she is, she's looking through a lorgnette. And if we look at that footnote, a lorgnette is a small eyeglasses on a short handle. This is about seeing. How do we see the world? Do we see things clearly? Do we see things that we are imagining? Do we see things that exist or don't exist? So this is a text, I think, and the lorgnette is brought up a little bit later, this imagery, this symbolism of seeing. What is it that both Anna and Gurov see? Perhaps these two soon-to-be lovers see things clearly in a way that other people don't, perhaps like their families are unable to see. Okay, on page 874. I am about midway through the page. 874, about midway through the page. But here the timidity. Anybody with me on this? But here the timidity and awkwardness of youth and inexperience were still apparent. So they walked off together. They went to Anna's room. I believe this is where we're at in this text. And there was a feeling of embarrassment in the atmosphere, as if someone had just knocked at the door. Anna Sergeyevna, the lady with the dog, seemed to regard the affair as something very special, very serious, as if she had become a fallen woman. An attitude he found odd and disconcerting. Her features lengthened and drooped, and her long hair hung mournfully on either side of her face. She assumed a pose of dismal meditation, like a repentant sinner in some classical painting. Okay, a few things that I want to point out to us in this sequence. That we see her youth, her inexperience, her discomfort in being in a room with Godov and beginning this affair. And we see that here through the description that she is timid and awkward. Now, perhaps that both Anna and Godov follow traditional male, feminine and masculine roles, perhaps in terms of morality. They are cheating on their spouses. And Godov seems to have, doesn't really have a moral issue of cheating on his wife. His overall desire for companionship and intimacy, or you could argue just to have sex, outweighs any moral consideration. Ultimately, they're going to engage in the same type of behavior, a sexual and an emotional, romantic and physical relationship. But we see, however, perhaps in traditional roles, that Anna feels that she is doing something immoral. And we see here the expressions that she had become a fallen woman, meaning that she had, done something immoral, that she had transgressed in some way, and that she was upset about this. So this really produces, I think, a complex character here. Anna is in a complex situation. She's unhappy. She's engaging in this relationship with Godov. Her hair hung mournfully. She's very serious looking. This is problematic. Now we can say Godov just doesn't care. He's just interested in sex. I would argue that is going to change. Interestingly, the last line of that paragraph, she assumed a pose of dismal meditation like a repentant sinner in some classical painting. This is how the text is sort of painting the picture for us. What does this mean to represent Anna at the verge of transgression, sexual transgression? What does this mean to capture her or to represent her as a classical painting? Not just a painting, but a classical painting. What I think this does is position Anna in a long history of women that exist in this predicament, if you will. Apparently men don't have, at least as represented by Godov, don't have as much of a problem or any problem with this at all. Desire supersedes social institution or religious institution. Very perhaps a masculine interpretation of things. In this sort of feminine woman role, Anna, she's it's a very problematic situation for her. But this is captured in a classical painting, meaning that this is a predicament that women have been in, that people have been in, all throughout time. Not just Anna and Godov, but throughout the ages, throughout history. So I think, one of the ways to sort of think about this, and we thought about this in terms of the disparity between the urban and slash modern environment, modernity, and Yalta as representative of something other than that. We have the dichotomy between dreams. I wanted to be an opera singer, and now I'm a banker. And we also have this sort of difference, disparity between institutions that codify certain behaviors, meaning religion, culture. You get married and you have certain responsibilities, both culturally and religiously, against what? Against desire. Is desire a bad thing? I don't think so. It only becomes problematic when it is held up against institutions. Now, here's the one of the larger questions. Why don't they just get a divorce? And I think that's a fair point. Was divorce legal in the 19th century in Russia? The answer to that, particularly for those of a higher socioeconomic class, the answer to that is yes. Divorce was legal. It was easier for a man, a lot more difficult for a woman. Was it easy? Not at all. I mean, divorce isn't easy today in the 21st century, even though 53% of all marriages, it might be down to 51%. I haven't looked lately. But over 50% of all marriages end in divorce. A man can file, get an attorney, a woman can file. If there are children involved, is it complicated? Absolutely, it's complicated. It's probably more, I would argue, much more complicated in the 19th century when it comes to property and also a woman's ability to generate income if she needs to generate income in order to survive. Okay. At the same time, I would say, even though divorce in many ways is less complicated than in the 19th century, it's still very complicated. People do all sorts of things short of divorce when they should just make their lives easier and just get a divorce instead of, I don't know, kill one another. And that happens, sadly, today. So divorce is very complicated. We are told here, a couple paragraphs down, Anna Sergeyevna was very touching, revealing the purity of a decent, naive woman who had seen very little of life. The solitary candle burning on the table scarcely lit up her face, but it was obvious her heart was heavy. Does it matter that she's seen very little of life? No, because if Godov is more of the game further down the road, not much is going to change. This is about not experiencing life in general. It's about that your family, your situation, your culture has produced the sort of modern man, the modern woman has produced people that are unhappy. We are told on page 875 a little bit more about Anna's relationship with her husband. She says about her husband that she was curious and she wanted something better. She wanted a different kind of life. It was probably a mistake that she married him. And now she says, in the context of what Godov and Anna are going to be engaging in, bottom of the first paragraph, and now I have become an ordinary, worthless woman, and everyone has the right to despise me. Are they on the same page right now? No. Godov says that he was bored to death. So he hasn't begun, I would argue, his transformation. But Anna is right from the very beginning. Her transformation is very problematic. Okay, so this is just not something that she can take lightly. A couple paragraphs further down, when a little later. Anybody with me? Okay. When a little later they went out, there was not a soul on the promenade. The town and its cypresses looked dead, but the sea was still roaring as it dashed against the beach. A solitary fishing boat tossed on the waves, its lamp blinking sleepily. Now, there's a lot of movement in this imagery, but it's also, we have the town and the cypresses are being dead, so no movement and still. On the other hand, nature, the sea is roaring and dashing. We have turbulence. This, I think, mirrors, again, nature. These sort of vignettes of nature mirror the turbulence of Anna and Godov's relationship. And this image here of the lamp blinking sleepily, what do you think that means? To me, it feels like a counter, a clock. Something is blinking, seconds counting down. What I'm thinking of here is that time for the time that Godov and Anna have together are winding down here. And this image of time, I think, we have in different places in the text, and I'll just give you another example on page 876. Second paragraph, there's dew on the grass, said Anna Sergeyevna, breaking the silence. Yes, it's time to go. They went back to town. When is there dew on the grass? In the morning. How long does it last? It doesn't last very long. Time is counting down to when Godov and Anna will have to depart. The end of this section on page 877 ends with Anna leaving to go back to Moscow. Time is invoked. There was an autumnal feel in the air, and the evening was chilly. Archetypal images here. What do we think of about seasons? What do we think about the time when things happen at a particular time of the day? Archetypal images, archetypal symbolism. Here we have autumn, or an autumnal feeling, meaning winter is coming, the dying of something, the death of something approaching. Evening, we can think about symbolically in the same way. These are not beginnings, these are endings. It's time for me to be going north too, thought Godov as he walked away from the platform. High time. Their time together is over. Okay, so I am on page 877, and Anna has just left, and Godov eventually leaves, and they have gone back to their old lives. So this has the sort of feel, perhaps this falls into the same situation that Godov has had in the past. He has a liaison, a sexual affair, and then it's over, and he goes back to his old life. And in his old life, we are told midway through the second paragraph of section 3, this is Godov, he became gradually, midway through the paragraph, second paragraph, section 3. He became gradually immersed in Moscow life, reading with avidity 3 newspapers a day, while declaring he never read Moscow newspapers on principle. Once more, he was caught up in a whirl of restaurants, clubs, banquets, and celebrations. Once more, he glowed with the flattering consciousness that well-known lawyers and actors came to his house, that he played cards in the medical club opposite a professor. He could once again eat a whole serving of Moscow fish stew served in a pan. So what are we being told here? He goes back to his old life. But he's looking for something. I mean, yeah, he's reading newspapers. It's the thing to do. You read newspapers, but you tell your social circle you're not really interested in what's going on. I almost get a sense of a kind of obsession here that I think we could almost relate to today with news channels and text messages and all of these different sorts of things that people are searching for, that people are looking for, just like Anna and Godov were watching the steamers come in, and Anna was looking for somebody to come in that never showed up. Godov is looking for something. And I would suggest to us, if we sort of, dip our toe into psychoanalytic thinking here, that there is a space. In psychoanalytic theory, we talk about the ego. The ego object perhaps is missing in some way, but there's an absence here. And how do we fill that absence? Well, in one way, in this paragraph, I think there are 2 bits of evidence here. In one way, Godov is looking for something, and he will never find it in those newspapers, but he looks and looks and looks. The second thing that I see here is, this line about he could eat an entire serving of this Moscow fish stew. Does that mean that the fish in Yalta was bad? He couldn't eat it? Maybe. But in the same way that there is a kind of emptiness that exists in Godov, that emptiness was reduced when he was in Yalta, when he was with Anna. He didn't need to fill the emptiness with food. He was satisfied. But back in Moscow, that hole, that emptiness inside has grown much larger. And now he needs to eat much more food. We see here, the text is telling us that Godov believes that in a month or so, he'll forget Anna, and that she will, as the text tells us, last paragraph, a couple lines down, on the right-hand side, she would only occasionally appear to him in dreams like others before her. But something is going to change. We are told on page 878, second paragraph, he began to feel an overwhelming desire to share his memories with someone. What does that mean? I think it means a couple of things. At least a couple of things. We want to share our memories with somebody because those memories are so powerful. We want to share those memories with somebody because we haven't fully reconciled what those memories mean. We need to talk about them, sound them out with other people. He wants to talk about these memories with other people because this was, as he's learning now, something completely different than anything he had experienced before. And this expression, overwhelming desire, creates a lot of power. Overwhelming means if he doesn't talk about it, he's going to what? Explode in some way. We see here a little bit further down on this page, still on page 878, beginning with this interaction of somebody that circulates in the Moscow circles. One evening, leaving the medical club with one of his card partners, part of one of the clubs of that he's involved in, and part of his sort of affluent or modern lifestyle. A government official, he could not refrain from remarking, "If you only knew what a charming woman I met in Yalta." The official got into his sleigh, and just before driving off, turned and called out, "Dmitri Dmitrich!" "Yes?" "You were quite right, you know. The sturgeon was just a little off." What's going on here? Well, we were told a moment ago, as I was just discussing, that he has an overwhelming desire. And that overwhelming desire led him perhaps to just want to tell somebody, anybody, this government official, just to get a reaction, to be acknowledged. Does the government official acknowledge him? No. The government official not only does not acknowledge him for the importance of what Gurov is trying to express, he doesn't even hear anything Gurov says at all. So this government official is going to represent the institution, going to represent Moscow culture, the urban environment, modernity, all of those sorts of things. So it is not just that Gurov cannot get an acknowledgement of this powerful experience he had in Yalta, but that people just don't listen to one another at all. Separation, alienation, marginalization from oneself and those around you, and also marginalization with yourself. An inability to express the things that need to be expressed. How problematic does this become? A couple paragraphs down. Gurov lay awake all night raging and went about the whole of the next day with a headache. He slept badly on the succeeding nights too, sitting up in bed, thinking or pacing the floor of his room. He was sick of his children, sick of the bank, felt not the slightest desire to go anywhere or talk about anything. Does this sound like a person? For those of you who say, hey, Gurov sleeps around with women and uses them. Okay, I'm not arguing with that. To a certain point. To a certain point, I think. I think we begin to see Gurov changing here. This is evidence of that. Anna represents something a little bit different. Both Anna and Gurov, both looking for something to fill the absence created by all sorts of different things. The raging ties us in a relationship to the rough seas. So we can see that nature is a mirror of the interior space of Gurov and Anna. He's sick of his children, sick of the bank, he's sick of everything. Is he in love? I don't know. But something is different. And something has highlighted his sadness about the modern condition that he experiences in a way that nothing has done before. Can't sleep. Not good. But on page 879, so what is it that Gurov does? He's going to go find Anna. He cannot, I don't know, we could say he can't live without her. Could Anna come looking for him? It's possible. Traditionally, again, if we're talking about traditional roles, the man would be more of the pursuer and would have more opportunity to go and seek out Anna. Is this only about sex? I don't think that it is. Because if Gurov wanted, apparently Gurov is the greatest lover in the world. He could go back to Yalta and start all over again. This is different, I would argue. Bottom page 879. Anna Sergeyevna came in too. Now Gurov has gone, I think, to the opera here, looking for Anna. This tells us that Anna is from, I think, the same socioeconomic class that Gurov is in. Anna Sergeyevna came in too. She seated herself in the third row of the stalls, and when Gurov's glance fell on her, his heart seemed to stop, and he knew in a flash that the whole world contained no one nearer or dearer to him, no one more important to his happiness. This little woman lost in the provincial crowd, in no way remarkable, holding a silly lorgnette in her hand. Again, the lorgnette, symbol of seen or not seen, now filled his whole life. Was his grief, his joy, all that he desired, lulled by the sounds coming from the wretched orchestra with its feeble amateurish violinists. He thought how beautiful she was, thought and dreamed. Now keep in mind, this is not Gurov writing these things out on a Hallmark card. This is not a cheeseball Hallmark holiday that Gurov is expressing himself to Anna. This is Gurov's interior space. So I think we have to take it with a little bit more sincerity. On page 880, towards the bottom of the page, Gurov has confronted Anna. And let's see this interaction. About 2/3 of the way down. How you frightened me. Are you with me? How you frightened me, she said, breathing heavily, still pale and half stunned. Oh, how you frightened me. I'm almost dead. Why did you come? Oh, why? But Anna, he said in a low, hasty tones, but Anna, try to understand. Do try. She cast him a glance of fear, entreaty, love, and then gazed at him steadily as if to fix his features firmly in her memory. I have been so unhappy, she continued, taking no notice of his words. I could think of nothing but you the whole time. I lived on the thoughts of you. I tried to forget. Why, oh why did you come? On the landing above them were two schoolboys smoking and looking down, but Gurov did not care. And drawing Anna Sergeyevna towards him, began kissing her face, her lips, her hands. Now, in the first part of what I read here, oh, how you frightened me, I'm almost dead. The second expression here, I'm almost dead, would, I think, make sense that she was so frightened, sort of a cliche. You scared me to death. You frightened me so much, I almost died. I think certainly that's one way to read it. I think another way to consider that is, you frightened me so much, end of thought. I'm almost dead because of my emptiness. And when Gurov begins to talk, and this is where I don't think that this is Gurov taking advantage of a younger woman, but also Anna finding something in Gurov that satisfies a deep need she has. I am so frightened, my thought ends there. I am almost dead, in parentheses, because I am so unhappy and I had been alive and all of those sorts of things. And then she goes on to say, I have been so unhappy, she continued, taking no notice of his words. Anna is saying to Gurov, okay, my words are important. I've been unhappy. I'm expressing myself. You need me, but I need you as well. And this ends section 3. Okay, I just want to back up just for a moment and clarify something. So Gurov had gone back to Moscow, the center of urbanity, center of modernity. Anna doesn't live in Moscow. She lives in this town of S, and she goes to the theater, and it is described as a provincial theater. So it is not in a center of the urban or modern environment, but my larger argument here is that they are compatible. She is at the theater, not the same quality as Moscow, but at least they're compatible. They have the same interests, and maybe not her family doesn't have the sort of affluence, let's say, that Gurov's family might have, but it's close, and that was my larger point. This is not the my argument is that this is not Gurov, the modern man, picking up and seducing the younger woman from the country kind of thing. That's not the argument that I'm making. I suppose it's an argument that you can make, but that's not one that I am making. The other thing I want to point out, which I think is of interest on page 881, just before the end of section 3, at the top of the page, you must go away, went on Anna Sergeyevna in a whisper. Do you hear me, Dmitry Dmitrich? You notice that in the beginning of this text, one of the irritations that Gurov had with his wife is that she did not call him by the name that he wanted. And here we see that Anna does. Okay, section 4, as we are slowly coming in for a landing with this text. I think this sequence here is the heart of, this is the heart of this text. This is the heart of modernity. In some ways, an explication of the human condition in modernity, in civilization, all of those sorts of things. Page 881, the large paragraph, midway through the page. He explained this too. Why don't you find that? So we can do this together. He explained this too. As he was speaking, he kept reminding himself that he was going to a rendezvous and that not a living soul knew about it or probably ever would. He lived a double life, one in public in the sight of all whom it concerned, full of conventional truth and conventional deception, exactly like the lives of his friends and acquaintances, and another which flowed in secret, and owing to some strange, possibly quite accidental chain of circumstances, everything that was important, interesting, essential, everything about which he was sincere and never deceived himself, everything that composed the kernel of his life went on in secret, while everything that was false in him, everything that composed the husk in which he hid himself and the truth which was in him, his work at the bank, discussions at the club, his, quote, lower race, unquote, his attendance at anniversary celebrations with his wife, was on the surface. He began to judge others by himself, no longer believing what he saw, and always assuming that the real, the only interesting life of every individual goes on as under cover of night, secretly. Every individual existence revolves, nothing's resolved, revolves around mystery. And perhaps that is the chief reason that all cultivated individuals insisted so strongly on the respect due to personal secrets. What is Gurdjieff here thinking about? He says we all have two lives. The life that we lead, that all of our friends lead, a life of deceptions, masks. Don't we wear masks? Don't we all wear masks to some degree? You have the mask of maybe the dutiful child, the mask of the good employee or employer, the good student. All of these sort of different identities that we change, that we exchange, depending on the context. But there's another kind of identity that exists without any masks. This is represented, I think, in these two terms, kernel and husk. The seed, the inside, the interior life. That is the real you, your real identity. This is the place of your real desires, your real hopes, your real dreams. Maybe the most important aspect of your life, most important aspect of your identity. And yet this has to stay hidden. You don't deceive yourself with that interior life, but you have to deceive everybody else. What does everybody else see? The masks, the husk, that every individual goes on as under cover of night. And what happens when there is an intersection, a collision of that interior life and the exterior life? What do we get? We get this affair. We get the complexities. We get desperation and frustration and sadness and anxiety, frustration. We get all of those things because they cannot exist in the same cultural, social, or psychological space. There's no resolution in this text because the interior life has to stay separate from the exterior life. You have to, this is what I think the text here is telling us. You can't be that opera singer. Maybe you can't be that writer. You can't be or pursue the dreams that you had when you were young. You have to become the banker. And you can fill in the rest of whatever occupations those might be. And there is sacrifice to that. Love, romance, satisfaction. And that, I think, is the difficulty that we are faced in this text. On page 882, middle of the page, he moved over, this is Gurdjieff, he moved over and took her by the shoulders, intending to fondle her with light words, but suddenly he caught sight of himself in the looking glass, and he goes on to ruminate about how he has become older and that he is unhappy, the sort of weight of unhappiness of his life, that barrier that separates the interior life, the kernel from the husk, has been broken down, that his romance, his love for Anna, has broken down that barrier. Is this a good thing? Is true love, romance, satisfaction, intimacy, resolution, are all of those things, all of those things create happiness and contentment? No, not as we see it here in this text. A couple paragraphs from the bottom, page 882. And only now, when he was gray-haired, had he fallen in love properly, thoroughly, for the first time in his life. Perhaps it was a life of separation, of marginalization, that allowed him, his misery had allowed him to reach this point where he could love somebody. But I don't think that's the only condition, because Anna, being a lot younger than he is, I would argue feels the same way. Feels the same way. And as we close out this text, then they discussed their situation for a long time, trying to think how they could get rid of the necessity for hiding, deception, living in different towns, being so long without meeting. How were they to shake off these intolerable fetters? How, he repeated, clutching his head. How? Clutching his head being here an act of just physical pain. And it seemed to them that they were within an inch of arriving at a decision, and that then a new beautiful life would begin. And they both realized that the end was still far, far away, and that the hardest, the most complicated part was only just beginning. Is there a resolution to their love affair? I don't think that there is. I do not think, I would argue, that the end of this text is one of self-deception, the very thing that Gurov said, that in your interior life, it's your true self, that you are truthful to yourself. I think this is an act of self-deception. I don't see either of them divorcing and leaving their families to be together. That would change everything. Okay, well, I'd like to ask any final thoughts or comments on this text, but I'm sitting here giving this lecture by myself with a microphone and a computer. How I very much would rather be with you folks and see what kind of thoughts that you have on this text as we go back and forth and peel back the layers and to see what you might think. But I'm going to conclude my discussion on Lady with the Dog. Thank you very much.